Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Frank Conkle, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's viewcast titled A Look at Top Leaders and Innovators. Before we welcome our speakers for today, I have a few brief logistical announcements about the viewcast today. First, we want you to be an active part of this conversation, and so we encourage you to submit questions for all of our speakers. You can do so by using your viewing platforms, using the Questions tab. It's at the bottom right of your it's at the bottom of your console. You can also write in your questions through Twitter using the hashtag R50Navigators, and we'll get to those as they come in. After the viewcast, stay tuned for a special presentation from our underwriter, Grant Thornton. On that note, I want to thank our underwriter, Grant Thornton, for making this event possible. So we'll begin the program today. Joining me to my direct right is Neil Brito. He is the Executive Director of the Intersector Project, and Michael Grass, Executive Editor of Route 50. We'll kick it off just by letting these guys introduce themselves a little bit, and we'll start with you, Neil.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I lead the Intersector Project, and we've shared an interest in government, business, nonprofit sector collaboration over the last few years, particularly at the state and local levels. We've focused exclusively on the United States, and we've learned a lot about collaboration and are excited to join this conversation today.
Hi, I'm Michael Grass. I'm the Executive Editor for Route 50, which is the Government Executive Media Group's publication covering state, county, municipal government around the U.S. And back in May, we kicked off the Navigator Awards. And we'll be getting into a lot more of the details in a little bit, but basically the thought that we had was there are lots of great ideas out there in the state and local space. And we wanted to honor those individuals and teams that are not only pushing these great ideas, but are also demonstrating excellence in how to actually implement them. The implementation part is what we're focusing on. And we opened the nomination process, and we got a great response from various jurisdictions and organizations from around the U.S. And we're in the process of going through some of those nomination submissions, and we're going to be talking about that process and what we're looking for. But we're also going to be extending the nomination process through August 15th. That's the big takeaway from today's event. So I think everyone who has submitted thus far, and for anyone who has submitted who's watching here, if you want to make any changes or polish some of your submissions through August 15th, we're definitely open to that. But overall, very excited from what we've gotten thus far, and we're going to talk about some of what we're seeing and some of the overarching trends and how to implement great ideas in state and local government.
Right, so that's kind of where we wanted to begin this conversation, with just outlining what the awards are, why we're doing them, some of the housekeeping. We'll get to more detail a little bit later on. But let's go into some of the challenges here that we face at the local level. We're going to talk about a few different issues for the next 45 minutes or so. We have workforce and budget challenges that state and local government agencies are dealing with. And back in January, I guess a good way to segue into this conversation is back in January, Route 50 released a survey of around 900 state and local professionals that looked at a variety of these challenges. And I want to get into some of the details here because they're highly relevant to both the Navigator Awards and state and local governments right now. So,
yeah, about that survey, and it's available on route50.com, but late or in the fall of last year, we sent out a survey to a lot of state, county, municipal employees around the United States. And we got a good response, about 900 people. And from that, we did analysis of the results, and we published the results of that survey back in January. And it covers a couple different topics, but respondents were asked to identify what their top challenges were, and workforce challenges and budgetary challenges were cited as the number one and number two challenges for state and local managers. And we wanted to talk about that survey starting out, because the Navigator Awards are about the solutions. Here they're about the ideas of how to meet some of these challenges. But we wanted to talk about what those challenges were. So I wanted to go through a couple of the figures, so when you look at workforce challenges, 90% of the survey respondents said that human capital and workforce issues were challenges for their organizations, and 37%, which was a plurality, ranked it as the #1 challenge that they face. Only 41% of respondents believe that their organizations are prepared for the silver tsunami. As you may know, there is a wave of retirements in the public sector space, and it's a big challenge for those jurisdictions to either replace those who are retiring or figure out different ways to structure their workforces. And then 40% of all the respondents felt like their organizations had difficulties recruiting and retaining top talent when they're competing with the private sector. And among state government respondents, that number dwindles to just 18%. Additionally, when you look at budget planning, 57% thought that their organization has to deal with more red tape these days, and 53% of respondents believe that their organization has accurate and complete performance data in which to make budgetary decisions. So when you look at that, in my view, when you look at the top challenges that state, county, municipal governments are facing these days, when they're trying to figure out the best way forward, they have these massive challenges with their workforces and the pure resources. And that sort of sets things up for how do you seek out the solutions, and oftentimes that leads to collaboration. Oftentimes it's collaboration is no longer an option, it's oftentimes a necessity, because state, county, municipal governments don't have the resources and the budgets that they once had. And so that's one of the reasons why we brought Neil in for today's program, because there were some interesting things related to collaboration, and a lot of the Navigator Award submissions that we got were very much built around these cross-sector collaborative projects, and we'll get into a little bit about that in a few minutes. But overall, from the survey, attitudes towards collaboration were pretty interesting. So 79% of those respondents thought that collaboration was a challenge for them. It wasn't their top challenge. Again, the top challenges were workforce and budgetary challenges, but collaboration was identified as one of the top challenges. But 77% of respondents thought that their organization was receptive to trying new ideas used by other government organizations. And then 81% of those surveyed thought that their organizations, departments, agencies, what have you, were collaborative with one another. So we're seeing some interesting things related to the attitudes of collaboration. And so, so I guess that's one of the things I wanted to ask Neil. Like, when you look at cross-sector collaboration, set the stage here. What are when you look at that survey, how does that resonate?
Yeah, I think what that says to me is there's now recognition on the why of collaboration and partnership. And with that recognition, the emphasis is now focused on how do we actually do it across budgetary challenges, across a broadening range of policy and issue areas. We are seeing both intersectoral partnerships and interagency partnerships as ways of trying to address problems in new ways, especially given the fiscal realities of a lot of state and local operating departments. I think what's tricky about collaboration is, one, it's a slightly ambiguous term. It means many different things in many different types of projects. And you have everything from collaborative governance to collective impact to public-private partnership, describing similar phenomena. What we've focused on and what we've studied has been collaborations that involve government, business, and nonprofit sector partners. And I think at the local and state level, this is the type of partnership that you're seeing more and more of, from everything from park stewardship to other natural resource stewardship to traditional physical infrastructure. The goal for many of these collaborations is to find a way to address a public problem in a new way. And that requires navigating the different norms, practices, languages of multiple sectors, of multiple agencies. And I think there's a science to it, and there's some technical tools to support managers, but there's also an art to it. And there's a lot of skills and capabilities needed around relationship development to help make these collaborations come true. And I think the many public managers, an increasing amount, want to learn how to do this well.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that stands out to me in looking at, you can tell Michael's a numbers guy because that's a lot of numbers that we just went over in the survey, but one thing that stands out to me is that a lot of folks, as almost 80%, identify collaboration as a challenge. So even though the stark reality is that this is very complex fiscal time that we're dealing with, resource, talent, time, we should be partnering, but it's hard.
Yeah.
And almost 4 out of 5 people said it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
What are some of the big challenges that you see from your perspective?
So I think the reason collaborations are challenging is the simple becomes complex in a collaborative environment. What I mean by that, everything from project management, having to navigate the different operating cadences of multiple organizations or multiple agencies, that's tricky. Different conceptions of success, both in how you measure it, how you imagine it, how frequently you evaluate it. That creates a barrier for, I think, and a challenge for many public managers. And also just sharing an understanding of the problem you're trying to address. Given sector biases or the way that a problem is traditionally thought of, measured, conceived, identified, it's going to differ from local government to a mid-sized business to a Fortune 500 company. You're going to see a range of ways of problem identification. And when collaboration's at its best, there's a shared understanding of the problem. But even getting to that point can be tricky and challenging.
That was my next follow-up question, is that I read a lot about the federal government and the challenges they have, even at interagency level, communicating exactly what sub-department might do to assist another sub-department when they share the same data and the same information, but talking to each other, even getting that conversation started, is often very difficult, even if you work in the same umbrella of an organization. So when you're reaching out, are there any tips that you can see? Like, are there folks that take the lead in organizations and then make a phone call, or is it more complex than that?
Yeah, so I think there's a range of tactics and tools that we've seen work successfully in the partnerships that we've looked at. One of the important steps that we encourage those partnering to take is be very deliberate in your process of engaging potential partners. And so whether it can be a formal or informal landscape analysis of who are the entities from a governmental perspective, a business perspective, or nonprofit sector perspective that influence that problem, whether it be through policy mechanisms, through market mechanisms, or through local research and advocacy. Have a strong understanding of the landscape. If you do that type of work, I think you can set the stage by then engaging partners, saying, look, you've come across a writer as being an important player on this problem or this issue. And there's typically been, I think, positive reaction to that type of engagement. And I think it highlights a few key types of organizations and institutions that can help that engagement process work well. Civic alliances that might be business-led but very civic-minded often have powerful roles in communities that can bring together leadership from government, business, the nonprofit sector in some really important ways. The Itasca project in Minnesota is one of these great examples where a few years ago they wanted to take up transportation infrastructure and educational challenges. And they found the best way to do that was to make sure that leadership from government, leadership from business, and leadership from the nonprofit sector knew each other. And it started in an informal environment, but over time that project has proven to be one of the more successful cross-sector projects we've seen.
So just an introduction can be a good start, right?
Yeah.
There were a few examples that really caught my eye in sort of preparing for this. P-Tech was one of them. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that. And then being a Michigan kid, as Michael was, to the Detroit streetcar project, I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
If you can give us a little background on those, 'cause I think they might be good examples for a variety of the viewers that we might have today.
Yeah, so P-Tech refers to a partnership that happened in Brooklyn, New York. And what it was a partnership involving the City University of New York, IBM, and Department of Education. And going back to what you just said, the importance of an introduction, one of the key leaders that made this partnership happen was a gentleman named Stan Latow, who was at IBM, but had a career in the Department of Education and also in educational think tanks. So he knew the landscape of what needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, during the recession, you look at the workforce development challenges, STEM education increasing importance. Not every community is being granted the opportunity to participate in STEM education, and the problem they wanted to address was, how do we build this new type of school that fosters STEM education among communities that may not have access to it? So they built effectively a 6-year academic institution that would provide both a graduate equivalent degree and an associate's degree from the City University of New York. And it wasn't easy.
Mm-hmm.
They were smart to establish a governance structure, a steering committee that had leadership from business, leadership from the relevant academic institutions, but also the parents, creating these new forms of educational partnerships and collaborations are contentious. But they stayed committed to the process. They had the right sponsors and champions, and the school launched to much affair. And it's been mentioned in 2 State of the Union addresses. It's been celebrated across the country. And I think one really important takeaway for those working in collaboration is, when you invest so much to launch a new innovative model, is you want to share that story.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that P-Tech and IBM did really well was they published a playbook that said, look, if you want to do this in your state or your city, here is how you do it. And they published this guide. And then other industry partners stepped in and started to launch these types of partnerships. And I think P-Tech's been a well-recognized cross-sector partnership. The other important element of it is there's limits to cross-sector collaboration. These are not silver bullets.
Mm-hmm.
Collaboration is a tool to solve a problem, but it doesn't always solve the problem perfectly well. And there are challenges that the school faces today with successful graduation rates, but I think because they built such a great infrastructure at the outset, they're likely going to be able to navigate those challenges.
Their playbook aspect is key, because we see that in the federal government a lot of times now with some of our new digital-focused organizations. We might bring that up a little bit later, but it also goes back to that survey where you see that 3/4 of the folks that were surveyed, of your 900 or so, said they were receptive to trying ideas that were used by other organizations. So publishing a playbook makes really good sense. Fiscally, it makes sense for us taxpayers, because they don't have to reinvent the wheel when they do some of these things, and those lessons learned, I'm sure, in playbooks such as that are outlined a little bit, and you can address them. One other thing too that caught my attention was the rise of some innovation labs, innovation districts within municipalities. In the federal government, we've had over the last 8 years or so, in fact, it's been the last four years really, the creation of new digital service teams within federal agencies that address sometimes small and sometimes large-scale tech problems, from web pages to much more complex legacy technology issues. And that's been pushed by legislation, that's been pushed by executive orders from the president. What are we seeing there on the state and local front from both the innovation lab side and some of the policy, state legislation, et cetera?
Yeah, so one example that we studied really closely was the Boston Innovation District. And it's an interesting story of how a city who wants to be more innovative, clearly has fantastic human capital and infrastructure in the city, but wants to improve, can use cross-sector partnerships and methodologies to build an innovation district. And it took the public sector in Boston, how they had to have the willingness to refine some of their approaches. So They employed some design thinking techniques. They decided to rapidly prototype the formation of certain key pieces to this innovation district. And they used traditional tools, tax policy, tax credits, to ensure that there was a business case for participation. But once that ecosystem started to develop, they recognized that they would need partnerships with community groups, partnerships with developers to build a desirable space that would harness the human capital of the region, attract companies, and make it a desirable place. What's interesting, I think, about the Boston Innovation District is that they, today, are still finding ways to improve and refine the innovation district. So I think of this as a frontier for innovation districts which have sprouted up across the country and across the world, often trying to create dense urban spaces attractive to high talent. And you need partnerships with academic institutions, you need partnerships across government, and I think the Boston case really illustrated that well.
Those are great examples, and that they're covered under that cross-sector partnership, which is one of the main categories that we are looking at for the Navigator Awards. But we have 4 others too that are important, Michael. So maybe you can take us through some of those. We have executive leadership as a key area, IT and data leaders, agency department chiefs, and I think it's next generation municipalities, stuff like that. So what makes a strong submission for this?
Yeah, so just to go through the 5 general categories overall, and this is all available on the awards website, so you can get all the specific details there. But we wanted to first honor individuals, but also teams. A lot of projects that are out there are driven not necessarily by individuals, but they are driven by groups of people. And so we wanted to make sure that we honored both, and we're trying to seek that out as much as possible. So
there's not a lot of one-man bands doing these.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are leaders who rise to the occasion and really drive the discussion and the project management and set that as a goal. So executive leaders, your city managers, your governors, your mayors, county administrators. So for that category, we're looking for strong individuals, but also when you think of, and this is where we get back to collaboration, it's not necessarily focused on one jurisdiction in particular. You could have a county administrator, a mayor, a governor collaborating on one thing, on one project, and that makes a really strong executive leadership team. They set this as a priority. So that's that first category. The second category are related to IT and data leaders. We all, this day and age, IT and technology, innovation is driving change and in our state, county, municipal governments. And there are people who get into the weeds and have to do a lot of hard work to leverage new IT systems to solve a particular problem. I'm being a little hesitant on going into too many details because we don't want to discuss any of the current submissions in any particular detail, so I'm trying to be a little abstract here without identifying who's under consideration at this point. But there are some great projects out there with IT and data leaders, and so thank you for all who have submitted in that category. Then we have agency and department chiefs. Similarly, with the executive level leadership, oftentimes it takes really strong leaders within a department or agency to really drive a project, or it might be a coalition of department chiefs. Oftentimes problems don't fit neatly within the confines of one department. So we're looking for also teams of of departments and agencies working on a common problem and finding a great solution to it. And the last two categories I think are my two favorite. One is next generation. These are rising stars within state, county, municipal governments or programs that are working with them. One of the fun things that I get to do in my job, whether based here in DC or traveling around the country, there are so many project managers, second, third tier managers, program assistants, people like those who are the workhorses and who to really execute a program. So we wanted to honor those rising stars who could be a future department chief or maybe a future mayor. You have to start somewhere. So we've gotten some great submissions for that. And then the last category is government allies and cross-sector partners. As we've been talking about here, in this day and age, you have to sort of think outside your immediate confines of your state, county, and municipal government to solve the problem. And so this is where a lot of organizations are partnering with philanthropies and nonprofit organizations, large and small. And we've seen a lot of great submissions for the government allies and cross-sector partners. And so thanks for all those who have submitted there. So I think overall what we're going to be seeing through this process is 50 great case studies of here's a problem, here's the framework that we use to evaluate the best strategy, here's who we worked with, who we partnered with, and here's how we came to a solution. So those are the basic categories that we're working with.
Too, I think it's important, going back to what Neil said on telling your story as a key thing to do when you've got some of these projects. You'll be highlighting some of the best, right? The ones that you guys go through. What is the process for determining who, which submissions are, the best? How do you do that?
Well, that will be handled by the Route 50 team on the editorial side and a team within our parent organization, the Government Executive Media Group. And so one of the great things about my job, I get to travel around the country and see a lot of these great people and look at these projects up close. And so when you, what makes a really great submission is just thinking outside the box, innovative thinking, unusual stakeholders that you've brought in to help sort out what the problem is and what the potential solutions are.
I hope we get at least one submission with Pokemon Go.
Kind
of hope that.
Well, you have until August 15th.
Right, we sent the deadline, so if you have any unique, useful, funny stories. I've been hearing about that every day since that game came out. It's been crazy to see what the federal government's reactions have been. I'm sure there's a lot of cool stuff on the local side too.
Yeah, if I could continue about some of the overall themes that we're seeing in some of the submissions that we've been getting, a lot of them focus on economic development, and I think that's something that, Neil, you've seen a lot in the projects that you're working on when you cited the Boston Innovation District. I think back to the Great Recession, and after that, some of the extreme fiscal distress that the city of Detroit was in, and there was an economic crisis. In some cases, there still is an economic crisis in Detroit, but a lot of the solutions are being introduced by philanthropies, nonprofit organizations who feel a civic duty to work with the city of Detroit, where the resources are considerably strained. So I think those are some of the great projects that we're seeing as submissions. And I'll get to some of the rest, but Neil.
I think Detroit is a great example for looking at how cross-sector collaboration is being used in new ways or being seen as a predominant model for transformation or revitalization. And you highlight the role of philanthropy. Kresge and many other foundations, the local, state, national level, have taken a particular interest in Detroit, from working with nonprofit organizations, working with SME and large corporations to address some of the challenges Detroit's faced. And it's forced them to think about their unique capabilities and capacities as foundations. And we're actually just winding down a research project that's looked at 10 years of giving from philanthropy to advanced thinking and practice around collaboration. And there's definitely been an uptick in the last couple of years post-recession. And I think there's two things to highlight. One is the unique role foundations can play as conveners. In many cases, they have immediate credibility and the networks across business, across government, across the nonprofit sector to convene, to get back to the importance of introductions, create that safe space, have those early stage conversations, put everything out in the open, establish shared understandings of problems, and get the right resources at the table to then enable some downstream design of a solution to a local problem. I think that foundations across the national, regional, local level again are increasingly looking to cross-sector approaches as a way of amplifying the effects of philanthropy.
Similarly, another trend, and this relates, are ideas and solutions for delivering a public service. So what I mean by that is in the current fiscal and resource states that a lot of state and local governments are in, they can't necessarily deliver the same level of service that they once were able to do. And so a lot of the submissions that we've gotten are from state, county, municipal governments that have been looking outside of their immediate jurisdictions to build coalitions and collaborative efforts to solve a particular service delivery problem. So that fits in with the cross-sector space. And then some other things, some great projects. We're seeing things related to projects that are facilitating or boosting engagement within or across different communities. I think that's a trend we're seeing all over the country. We're at a day and age where everyone has access to a smartphone or social media, and they can instantly tweet, complaint about something. But social media also provides a lot of ways for governments to collaborate with their citizens and other organizations. So we're seeing some interesting submissions related to engagement. And then the last general area where we're seeing some great submissions are related directly to improving a government operation. So again, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I want to keep the submissions in sort of an abstract phase right here. But there's one county government that submitted something related to a very specific IT process within their criminal justice system, and they presented a very interesting case related to how they solve this challenge. And so when I think of government operations overall, some of the challenges that governments are facing on the IT side, this also relates to the Great Recession. Budgets were cut, and a lot of state, county, municipal governments delayed upgrades for their IT systems. And so what we're seeing now is a lot of state, county, municipal governments trying to play catch up. It's an exciting time in the government IT space because of this interesting quandary with playing catch up. But also technology has evolved and presented new challenges and new solutions. And that relates to data especially. We have so much data out there. And I think the most successful governments out there are the ones who aren't just collecting it, but they are doing something with it internally to improve their process, there's also the component of transparency and making the data available, and that fits into engagement. So with a lot of our, what we've been talking about here, there are a lot of interwoven themes that we're seeing in a lot of the submissions. And so I'm excited to see what else we'll get in the next couple of weeks. And I hope that some of the stuff that we've been discussing here inspires others to think, well, maybe we didn't think of that exactly, and but that is a really great idea, and people, we want to share those ideas because one of the primary missions for Route 50 as a publication is we want to be a place where those challenges, those solutions can be shared across jurisdictional boundaries, and so that's we're seeing a lot of that come together through this awards process. So.
Yeah, you mentioned that legacy tech issue on the state, county, city side as an exciting time, but I think for a lot of folks that
well,
work
it's a frightening time too.
Somewhat depressing time because you're trying to do a lot with old, antiquated stuff, and it doesn't lend itself easily to modernization. I mean, the federal government's a great example. You know, they have a general IT budget of around $90 billion or so, and I think about 80% of it is spent on legacy tech. So they're knee-deep trying to figure the same types of problems out. So they're throwing everything they can at it, from these digital teams and collaborative efforts to, you know, new acquisition processes and those kinds of things.
So I guess I should reiterate some of the next steps for those who have submitted nominations and what comes next. So as we said earlier, we're going to be extending the nominations window through August 15th. So there are a couple more weeks to get some additional nominations in. And again, if anyone who has submitted anything already wants to polish or tweak what they've submitted, please email submissions@route50.com and we'll get that sorted out. So after August 15th, we'll be putting together our final list of the 50 finalists. And we'll be going through that and sorting it out. And then we'll be rolling out the list starting in late August, and so stay tuned for that. And then later in the fall, and we're still working out details on timing, but in late fall we will have a capstone event where we will be out of that group of 50, we will be selecting 10 finalists from that group, and for special honors, and we'll be putting together a package of profiles on those 10 finalists, and I think it'll be a really great package of problems, solutions, and a toolkit and case studies and things where those jurisdictions, those projects that they've been working on can be shared more broadly and hopefully inspire others to follow their lead or adapt that idea for their local conditions. So it's going to be a really exciting time in the next couple weeks and months.
And a lot of work for you.
Yeah.
It's all good though.
But it's fun work. So.
Just speaking of, you know, the 10 submissions that we'll be highlighting the most, we have a little less than 10 minutes left here, so I want to get to some audience questions, and you can continue to send those in using the hashtag R50Navigators if you'd like. The first one was just what level of government is pushing innovative ideas the most? What are you guys seeing there?
Yeah, you know, I think all levels of government, especially state, county, and local, are doing a good job. I think at the city level, especially in cities that have been very progressive on open data, we're seeing some really unique, exciting collaborations that are happening, from the way that the civic technology community will take up and really engage with everything from local transportation, policy, informing data collaboratives, to looking at different types of educational data. We're seeing it across different policy domains. So I'm really excited to see innovation at the city level on data collaboratives as a new form of collaboration that I think is going to be important to the public service going forward.
Is a lot of it almost forced innovation based on lower level of resources and that kind of thing, or is it more through evolving emerging technologies that are available? Like open data, for example, we're seeing it in the federal government shared through APIs that, then you can allow public citizenry to build off of those data sets. Is that happening at the state and local county levels as much?
I think I've seen that at the city level, maybe a little bit less so relative to the federal government. I think that it will increase with time though, and I think especially if there's some early wins or some success stories in this kind of generation of civic technology, we'll see it continue.
Yeah, I would echo what Neil was saying. I think when you look at the different levels of government, I think the lower you go, oftentimes the more innovative ideas and solutions are out there, because when I talk with mayors and county executives and agency heads around the country, when they look to Washington, D.C., where we are right now, they don't necessarily see as much help or resources being made available. So they have to make things work. The garbage has to get picked up on a weekly.
Get stuff done.
Right? So I think overall you're seeing that more at the municipal level and at the county level, depending on where we are. I think state level governments sometimes have some of the legacy issues that the federal government has to deal with, just within their own state context. Though there are some great innovative projects being driven by state governments. But I think there's usually more freedom and an expectation to experiment and innovate at the municipal level, especially.
One of our other questions just popped up as sort of slightly morbid, but just how important is it to learn from the failure of others? And I would probably add on to it myself. Is it good to take those risks if you know you could fail? We hear this all the time on the federal level, where fail fast. Yeah. What does that actually mean? And a lot of people get, that's bad for them. If you fail, you're a program manager, you try something and it fails miserably. It doesn't always look good on your track record.
And it's also easier said than done.
Right.
I think it's become a popular sentiment to fail fast and fail quickly. I will say, in the space of collaboration and cross-sector collaboration, this is one of the biggest barriers to advancing thinking and practice, which is the limited opportunity to learn from failure. You'll find 1,000 case studies of successful partnerships and maybe 10 on learning from failure. And in reality, we can continue to say these are the 10 things you need to do in a collaborative environment, but until we've tested whether or not those 10 things were absent in those failed collaborations, we don't really know. And so I think there's a huge opportunity and an important opportunity, as this approach is used more frequently, to find ways to learn from failure. I think foundations have a role in enabling and creating safe spaces to learn from failure. And they're also catalyzing so many collaborations that they have this repository of successes and failures to learn from. But it's an important piece.
I think there is a sweet spot between success and failure. And I would love to see submissions that hit this sweet spot. And I think it's easier the farther away you get from that initial point of failure to reflect appropriately. But I think when you look at ideas that are being tested out for the first time, there's probably a high likelihood that there is going to be an element of failure or some level of something that isn't successful. But hopefully that government that tried that will learn from that, evolve and adapt. But it's also other jurisdictions, if they're smart, they're going to look to that jurisdiction that made that mistake or was going through that evaluation process of what we did wrong, and then they can take that and adapt it for their own local conditions. So I think that also hits on one of our driving missions here, which we want to facilitate those stories, that learning process. So, and I hope that with our final slate of 50 finalists, that we do have a good mix of submissions that are from governments that learn from a neighboring jurisdiction or from someone on the other side of the country. And I think overall, what Neil was saying, philanthropies and nonprofit organizations are oftentimes really good venues to take a look at all this from a perspective where they can evaluate things in a very analytical way or academic way. Where I think when you think of failure, there's always an immediate political blowback, and I think the farther you get away from that, the more constructive reflection can be done. So
that highlights the importance of governance and having a plan after the introduction period, beginning out, sort of setting metrics for what you want to accomplish, and continually having an open stream of communication so that when there are tough points that come along, they can be addressed, or and interested parties, stakeholders can be kept abreast of things. I think that's one of the big things in government when there's blowback is there's a lack of transparency somewhere. And whether it's Congress hauling someone in to testify about, and give them the brimstone type talk, which are fun to cover because they're controversial. They're also examples of where communication probably could have helped a lot. Although I'm not sure I'll bring the fail fast motto to my duties because I don't think it would go over too well with my employer. I want to close really quickly here. Michael, there's a couple things here you want to highlight. There's a newsletter and an ebook coming up from Route 50.
So a couple wrap-up notes here. For people who have submitted nominations, again, August 15th, and I will most likely be following up with some of those who submitted things for some follow-up questions. But also overall, if you're new to Route 50, I would encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, which is at Route50, ROUTEFIFTY.com/newsletter. We put that out every Monday through Friday morning, so it's a great tip sheet of what's going on around the country. And then we also just today released a new ebook focused on county level government. The National Association of Counties annual conference is coming up later next week. I will be out in Long Beach, California for that, and we have a special ebook that is focused on county level government. And that is on our website right now, so please download that.
Great. Michael, Neil, thank you so much for doing this. I'll turn it over now to Constance Sayers, our President of Government Executive Media Group, for a special presentation from our underwriter, Grant Thornton. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much to our panel for that interesting discussion, and thanks to you, our viewers, for tuning in today. I'm Constance Sayers. I'm the President of Government Executive Media Group, and I'm here in our Washington, D.C. Watergate studios with Doug Dare. He's the Principal of State and Local at Grant Thornton. Grant Thornton is the sponsor of today's Viewcast, but also the sponsor of the Route 50 Navigator Awards. So I want to tell you a little bit more about my guest, Doug. He has over 28 years of experience in public sector consulting. He leads the Central Region and the Health and Human Service industry for state and local government at Grant Thornton. He has worked in over 20 states with a focus on system implementation and transformational change. So thank you so much for being with me today.
It's great to be here.
Traveling
Constance.
in from Austin. So let's get right to it. Then the Route 50 Navigator Awards are all about best practice examples in state and local government. In the spring, Grant Thornton sponsored some of the research on Route 50 where we examined the biggest challenges facing state and local managers. And you did hear the previous panel talk a lot about some of the findings from this research. So Doug and I are going to take a look at some of those findings from that study and talk about whether you're seeing some best practices and innovations and innovative solutions around some of what are real world challenges. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's start with budget planning. Budget planning is one of the top challenges from the Route 50 survey that we conducted. Specifically, we see many managers say they don't have accurate or complete performance data needed to make budget decisions. What steps can people take to improve this, and are you seeing examples of best practices here?
Yes, I think the biggest theme in the whole budget area is around accountability. And whether it's general funds or funds from a city government that are coming from the taxpayers, there's a desire to make sure that money is spent as it should be spent. And there's a big theme around accountability for those types of funds, and also for funds that are coming from federal and other sources. There's new uniform grant guidance that requires entities to report back what they've accomplished with that funding, and so I think there's a big change that's been happening in the market over the last couple of years around accountability. I think the other thing, particularly in the IT area, is there's more and more emphasis on buying services, whether it's software as a service or infrastructure as a service.
Right.
So you're seeing things that were traditionally in capital improvement type budgets moving over into operating budgets, and that makes it more complex too. So those are a couple of areas that I've seen, and I'm seeing entities coming up with a variety of ways to deal with that, using data analytics that maybe weren't traditionally used for the budget process, but it serves to make their points about what they need to accomplish their mission as an entity.
Well, speaking of data, I mean, governments are swimming in data. Because one could say they're drowning in data. But database decision making was cited as a challenge for 76% of our survey respondents. One thing we see at Route 50, and they talked about it in the previous panel, is that data can actually be a solution for so many of the challenges outlined in the survey. But many managers just don't know where to begin. That's the biggest thing I keep hearing about when we talk about data, is managers just don't know where to start. Do you have any advice?
My advice is to begin with the end in mind. And what are you trying to prove? And it comes down to almost like the scientific process, where you have a premise or a group of premises that you're trying to prove or unprove with the data. And just analyzing data for analyzing's sake will not get you anywhere.
Right.
And so I think it's very important to have that end in mind, have goals, and understand how to stage that data and get accurate data to make decisions. Sometimes those decisions are inferences. It's not a perfect set of data, and that's okay. And I think a lot of state and local governments get caught up in perfection, and it's like, well, this data is giving you some directional information, and you should take that along with the information that is very precise. So I think that precision aspect, and then that having an end in mind, I think are extremely important.
Yeah, whenever you're drowning in data. Another thing that folks talked about in the last panel was the IT modernization. And IT planning is a big challenge, specifically having the budget to invest in modernization of organizations that you're seeing are having the most success. What approaches are they levering? How are they doing it?
Well, I think the planning
Are they failing fast? Are they failing slow?
Yeah. The failing fast point was a great point earlier, and it ties into what I'm seeing as I'm talking to state officials across the country and city officials also. There's this desire to move more toward agile methodologies, and that's one of the benefits of agile is you do fail quicker. I would like to say you course correct quicker, but you expose where the issues are going to be a lot earlier than in a waterfall traditional system implementation life cycle. So that whole agile aspect, I think, is is an adjustment because you
Yeah.
have to involve everyone and you have to collaborate with the program area. So collaboration was a big part
And
of the discussion
communication.
earlier.
Yeah.
And making sure that the business leaders are engaged throughout an IT initiative will always make it more successful no matter what methodology
Right.
you're using. So I think those are a couple of important
Yep.
areas related to planning.
Yeah.
And that also around collaboration, you need to plan for collaboration from the beginning because
Yeah.
it impacts the budget, it impacts how you work together. You need really solid project charters to discuss at the beginning, here's how we're going to work together, and also have a mechanism to course correct over time.
Yeah. Last question here. According to our survey, only 39% of state and local employees believe their organization's recruitment and hiring practices are competitive with the private sector. And I think this probably varies also from city, because I think you can have very different case studies in Austin or in Sacramento than you may have in other cities.
Yeah.
But you're also seeing that job skills are changing, and you mentioned to me something about the CIO position changing. So could you elaborate a little bit on some of the changes that you're seeing in recruiting and retaining, and the way jobs themselves are changing?
Yeah, and the recruiting and retaining of technology talent is going to be very regional, and there's going to be different state governments where they're going to be more competitive in the local market than in others. Places like you mentioned Austin and Sacramento, there's a lot of IT talent in those areas, and you have to sell the benefits of working to government, which it's not necessarily top line salary, it's going to be other benefits that you gain working for a state or local government, and being able to articulate those and compete in that market, I think is important, because there's people that are going to make choices beyond just what that final dollar amount is.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the MBA.
Right.
It's people that have lives and families, and they're trying to create a lifestyle.
Yep.
And I think every local entity needs to be aware of how that works for them locally.
Yeah. Any other parting thoughts before we sign off?
No, I thought it was a great conversation earlier. The collaboration part, I think, is very, very interesting, and I'm seeing more public-private collaboration. I'm seeing that collaboration with not-for-profits, particularly in the health and human services space, where their mission is very close to the same as state government. You're helping the same clientele and figuring out how do we help this family get what they need and the services that they deserve, I think is very important. So I'm excited about that whole aspect of collaboration. I think
it'd also be great to have, at the end, as Michael mentioned, we're going to have 50 real best practice stories to share, which is great. And it's really at the mission and the heart of what Route 50 is trying to do. And I want to thank you for joining me today, and I want to thank Brent Thornton for also sponsoring this program and really seeing the potential and the benefit of it. So thank you. And thanks to our viewers for joining us today. If you want to view the Viewcast and share it with your colleagues, the archive will be available on our website. We will also be sending an email out with the link to the webcast. Also, don't be shy. If definitely if you've listened to the stories and you think you've got a great, your team is doing something great in one of these areas, please submit your nomination for the Navigator Awards by August 15th on the Route 50 website. That's Route 50, ROUTEFIFTY. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.